Everybody, thank you so much for joining Derek's web chat show. This is the 8th in the series and I'm delighted to see you all. I'm running it on a Monday, Wednesday and a Thursday, and the next one tomorrow evening at 4:30 is with my friend Kevin O'Connor from Chicago, who's on the call now. So it's a great pleasure to see you all. Thanks for joining. The first tip I want to give you from me is to judge people on what they do, not what they say. And as we've seen all around the world, people have been telling us to isolate, stay 6 feet apart, don't go to our holiday homes. And here in the UK, the First Minister and the medical director in Scotland goes off to a holiday home 2 weeks running, which is absolutely amazing. I was in banking for a while and I always judge people on their history, not what they told me, and that's kept me safe in banking and has kept me safe all through my life from making poor decisions. Always look back and see what they say. I've had a few emails in from you guys. Thank you so much for sending them in. Matt Dawson asked me, how do I avoid saying something when I've closed the sale? And you know, when I'm talking about selling, we're talking about every aspect of selling, just when you're presenting to someone or when you're pitching. But of course, if someone agrees with you, the trick is to shut up, say thank you, and sign the contract or just get their agreement. Do you know what most people do? They keep talking because they like doing this, which is absolutely stupid. So I told Matt in his post to me, I said, these are the things I might do. Remind yourself on your pad before you go into the meeting. Close your mouth. Secondly, to listen really carefully with your ears and your eyes, and when you get the closure, therefore say thank you. And thirdly, debrief yourself, however you do that. And some of you know I debrief myself with one of my books, which I keep my notes in, keep a note of everything so I can go back to it. That's a great way of never forgetting. So they're the trips. And the other question I got was, do people who talk a lot have massive egos? And I just answered to that question, yes, I think they do. So now it's a great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, people who have met Gabby before. Gabby was on last week and taught us about managing your state and all sorts of things from neuro-linguistic programming. When I left Barclays, I went on 2 NLP courses and Gabby was the coach on one of them. But I just thought I'd show you some of the books I've got on NLP, because a lot of people don't understand NLP. There's one, there's another one, NLP for Business Success. Tony Robbins, who was the real guru on NLP in the first place, but got sued by Richard Bandler for using his name. Unlimited Power, and finally Change Your Life with NLP. And that's just a small selection of the books I've bought, because I think it's a fantastic subject. But Gabby knows a lot more than I do on this subject. So welcome, Gabby. Thanks for joining us again. Lots of comments on your session last week. I'd like you to talk to us today about triggers and anchors and how we can use those and how they're used in sports psychology and also by the highest performers. Welcome, Gabby. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome. Thank you very much for having me again and inviting me here. Good to see some faces that I know and lovely to meet some new faces as well. So, shall I go straight into it?
Straight into it, please. Yeah, straight.
Anchors and triggers. Some of you will have come across these words before, an anchor or a trigger. And basically, they are things that go on in your life. And I'm sure all of you have had a situation where you have suddenly had a smell. I was with a colleague of mine recently, and we were walking down the street, chatting away, and suddenly Pete vanished. He was in front of me, but you could see he'd gone somewhere. I said, Pete, are you okay? And he said, I've just smelt a perfume. And it took me right back to when I was a teenager. And I said, okay, when you're ready, can we carry on with the conversation? because the trigger of the smell took him straight back to a memory. So triggers or anchors, they're kind of synonymous with each other, is when something happens to our senses. So it could be a smell, it could be something that we see, it could be a feeling, it could be a touch. Dentists, so certain people will have certain anchors around the dentist, and you get a certain feeling and it reminds you and it takes you straight back to a memory. And what's really interesting is it's based on how the brain works. So our brain is made up of synapses, and what gets fired together gets wired together. What gets fired together gets wired together. So if you think of a time when you have been incredibly excited, for example, the fun fair, it could be just as you're coming down the roller coaster and it's been a thrilling experience for you, then that sense of that feeling in your gut is interpreted as enjoyment and fun. But it could be that you were petrified on that same roller coaster, and just as you were tipping over, that same feeling fills you with complete dread and fear. It's the same feeling, but the interpretation is going to be different for different people. So what I find very interesting is I do a lot of work in presentation skills, and presenting to a group of people for many can be terrifying, because what they get is that sensation in their gut and they interpret it as fear rather than excitement. So it's worth asking yourself the question, where do your interpretations come from? Because very often the senses that we have been told to mean something by our teachers, our parents, our peers, whoever it might be. And is that still true for you today? So for example, if I were to present a python in front of me, some people will go, oh, look at Derek's reaction.
I would.
Whereas others would go, oh, wow, because they've been taught to interpret it as fascination. Same thing with spiders. So a lot of phobias come from our anchors and the triggers of those anchors.
Now, Gabby, just to ask you a question there. So everything, I remember you telling me, everything that goes on in our life is in our brain.
Gets stored.
We can't remember it, but the skill is bringing back those memories, but by those senses, sometimes it triggers off. So as I was drinking some Vimto this morning, and Vimto immediately takes me back to my fabulous summer holidays with my mum and dad in Margate, where we used to go every year. Vimto, straight back.
I didn't think they still made Vimto.
Oh yeah, it's a big favourite of mine now. I think Vimto's an essential, as opposed to I'm told beer's not. But how does that work in sports psychology? I remember Jonny Wilkinson doing something like that, and I know that a lot of the football managers have sports psychologists that use this to get people into the zone.
So just with a show of hands, how many people here are sporty? Okay, I'm impressed. There are some that are and some that aren't. In sports psychology, what they are training is a way of creating a trigger for yourself that anchors you into doing something well. So in the rugby, Jonny Wilkinson.
Jonny Wilkinson, yeah.
Jonny Wilkinson.
Right.
So Jonny Wilkinson, names me. Jonny Wilkinson is a guy that has got the most number of, or certainly did have the most number of kicks that were successful through the H of the rugby goal.
That's it.
For those that don't know him. And he, like Jonny, the basketball player, imagined getting the ball across the line, across the goal. And it's the visualization of getting things done and being successful. So this became the trigger. This became the trigger. We talked about the smell earlier. This was a trigger. And it's a, you know, how many of you do this on a regular basis? You don't. It's something unique that you do. So it would have been the pressure in his fingers. It was the preciseness of his hands, so that every time he felt that in a particular way, it would create a muscle memory in his mind and his body to be able to kick perfectly.
You can watch them. You can watch some golfers doing that when they're standing on the tee, because golf's a really tricky game because you're away you're out there for 4 hours, and maybe they twist the club a certain way in their hand before they go totally into the zone. And I remember you told me to try a Vic inhaler before I was speaking at a big conference where I was getting nervous, and take a big smell of that and get into the zone, and it works for me. Absolutely.
Smell is by far the easiest trigger to get into the right state. We talked about states last week. For children or anyone actually who is doing exams, one of the things that I recommend is that they use a scent, because now in exams you can't take in food, so you can't have the taste. A lot of people have gum. You could use the inhaler, but having scents around you. Lavender is very relaxing, which when you're in an exam setting, to be relaxed can be very good. But in sports, you might want something that's a bit more invigorating. So the citruses, the oranges and the lemons, having those smells, the mint, it's very invigorating. So that triggers you to be in a particular state.
We need some triggers for states at the moment, don't we, with what we've got? Exactly. Really important for people to think about a trigger. I was just going to say Mrs. Merkel and Tony Blair used to use this as an anchor and a trigger. So they're presenting, they can't point, so they're doing this, and you can squeeze this as hard as you like, and people won't notice what you're doing when you're tense and in a state. So the politicians use it as well.
So the important thing about that is that before you do it, you're consciously getting yourself into a particular state. So if any of you have ever been in a situation where a loved one has died, we had the situation at work, and I'm going to work two ways. So we had a guy at work, and his mother had died, and he was sitting at his desk. It was an open plan desk, and everyone came into the office, and as they walked past, they would tap him on his back, on his shoulder, and say, "I'm really sorry, mate, sorry to hear about your mum, sorry to hear about your mum. Oh, really sorry to hear about your mum." What's going on there is every time people are saying it, what he's thinking about is how sad he is because he's lost his mum. 3, 4, 5 years later, someone comes up to him who he hasn't seen, and he's like, "Oh, wow, great to see you, Derek. I haven't seen you for ages. How you doing, mate?" "Oh, yeah, I'm doing all right, but I lost my mum 3 years ago." "Okay." And he came back, and we were in a coaching scenario soon after that, and he said, "It's really weird. I've just met a mate of mine that I was really excited to meet, but suddenly I felt really sad." And he talked me through exactly what happened, and we replayed it. And when I did that to him, he went, "Oh God, I just think of my mum." And we realized that he had been anchored all those years back. So we have anchors that we won't necessarily be mindful of. However, knowing that that was then the anchor, and knowing that he didn't want that to be a sad anchor anymore, we then worked out, what does he want that to mean? Because that is quite a, "Hey, hi, how you doing, mate? I want to feel good." So we then got him visualizing, so you can visualize, because the brain doesn't understand the difference between reality and imagination. the synapses still kick off in the brain, whether you're imagining or it's actually happening. So we imagined that he was really happy, and we built up the excitement and we built up the happiness. And then as he was feeling really joyous, I kept going like this and feeling really joyous. And now every time someone pats him on the shoulder, he feels great. With the politicians, they're building up a sense of confidence or a sense of gravitas, and you can build up the different states and then connect it with that, a particular feeling that you wouldn't do. My grandfather always used to pull our ear, literally pull our ear, but only once he had us giggling. So every time you see someone or you're with someone and they are laughing outrageously, make a strange sound, or touch, if it's appropriate, touch them in an unusual way, because then you can just bring it back whenever you want. Try it with your children, your grandchildren. Fantastic.
So that's installing an anchor, as they say in psychology, which the psychologist, the sports psychologist, Mrs. Merkel's coach, will help them do. But what you were saying earlier is that we've had negative anchors installed in us by other people, by things that they have done, which we don't know about.
Correct.
And in a way, we need to either uninstall them or be aware of them. Sometimes when I'm driving on my own or something, suddenly I think of something, and I then play it back and wonder what just happened, why I thought of that person. And now I've figured it out. It's music. Is music an anchor?
Massively. Massively. I mean, I can see Shipal nodding his head. Absolutely. Music can be a huge anchor, and you can create it to be an anchor as well. So if you have music on in the background when you're doing great work, that piece of music will enable you to get into that state of mind more readily to do more great work. Equally, when you want to go out partying, you might want to have a different type of music. So it's working out for you what is the best type of music to have in given scenarios. And again, there's a lot of research showing that things like Mozart and Haydn are very good for creativity, ideally with no words, because it stimulates the mind, because music is a vibration, and it will create different vibrations in you to enable you to get into relaxed states or fun, more creative states.
So it's very important that the music we choose is carefully selected, and for whatever we want to do. Now, I'm a massive fan of the Rolling Stones because they're older than me, and not many people are older than me, so that's great. And there's great marketing, great music, and they're making absolute fortune. I kind of like playing them at certain circumstances, but I wouldn't want to play those at 4 o'clock in the morning if I wanted to go to sleep. And I think I mentioned to some people before, when I was president of the Speaking Association, I used Wow, I Feel Good by James Brown at every interlude, etc. And that's a massive anchor for me. But the words are good, because the words have to be important as well, don't they? The words influence as much as the actual melody.
Well, it's interesting because different people will pay attention to different things. Music in and of itself is a vibration. So it's a bit like when you talk to an animal, you talk to a dog, or you talk to a child who doesn't really understand. If you're saying, "Oh, you are such a naughty boy. Oh, I'm so cross with you." If you say it in that tone of voice, actually it's the tone that is more important. So it's the vibration of the music that's more important than necessarily the words. However, some people, my family, they can hear a song once and they could sing it back to you word perfect. I don't know how they do it. Well, I do know how they do it. It's not a skill that I have chosen to take on. And part of the reason for that is I was brought up with 2 languages. And we often listen to music in Portuguese, which was neither of the languages that I was being brought up in. So I didn't hear the words because it was just another sound. So some people will hear the words and some people don't hear the words. And there are lots of love songs out there that can have a lovely vibration. But actually, if you are feeling a bit down and you start listening to a lot of the love songs, which are all about sorrow and being deceived and loss, and it can actually create more sadness. So be very mindful of the words and also the style of the music and that level of vibration, because they are all anchoring certain states, many that you will already have set up, but you can set them up on purpose for yourself.
Gabby, I think we need some time for questions. Don't forget, everybody, put your questions in the chat box and I'll read them out. I will turn the unmute off in a minute. But Gabby, one last tip for anybody going away from this now and saying, I want to set up an anchor for either when I play golf or tomorrow when I want to start off and really whoosh off my work and whatever it is. A positive anchor, please.
I'll share an anchor that I know Derek has used. Whether he still uses it or not, I don't know. I'm sure he will tell me. One of the things that Derek will do before he goes into a talk is he will go into a private room, cubicle or whatever, and he'll shake around, which just gets the blood flowing. And at that point, I'm not sure if the anchor is still this.
I'm not sure either.
So he used to have an anchor and he would do this, but whilst he was shaking and feeling at his most vibrant, so that when he got on stage and he was able to talk to everyone, you might notice that his hands were like this, because he's still, even though he's more controlled, he's still got the anchor going, exactly like the politicians. But the key is, what is the state that you want to anchor? Get yourself into that state through visualization, through whatever triggers you can create around you, and create some kind of anchor that enables you to use it subtly if needed, because sometimes you want to create these anchors that are not noticed by other people. Whilst I sit here, I've got a smell in the room which allows me to get into a very calm place that I know I can just call on any state that I need to, because I'm feeling very grounded. You can't smell it, but I can.
Fantastic, Gabby. That's brilliant. We've got some comments in the chat box, which I'm just going to look at. Keith says, I'm not a lyrics person at all and only know the main words. I love music without knowing the words. I can get into the emotions without a single word. All I'd say there is, Keith, I would say that the words can still affect you if they're negative in your unconscious mind. And I know that you're big into hypnosis, Keith, so you will know that, of course, as well. What's the difference between a trigger and an anchor is one question. Does the trigger get us to the anchor? I think the answer to that is yes. Does it, Gabby?
Absolutely. Yep. So it's the smell that gets you to the feeling. It depends on how you use the words. I mean, an anchor is the actual, in pure NLP terms, an anchor and a trigger are the same thing. But in normal speak, and I prefer speaking normally, or as normally as I'm able, it's the trigger that creates the feeling, and that's the important thing. But that is the anchor. That can be the trigger, but that is also the anchor. So pure NLP, it's exactly the same. It's trigger, anchor, same thing.
We don't want pure NLP. We want practical, useful stuff.
Yeah,
that's what I always found.
So practical, the trigger leads to the state. or the emotion.
And that's that high state you want if you're just about to take a penalty flick in hockey or a penalty in football. Ryan writes in, he says, I've used Derek's shake around the hands and hips anchor, having been on several special occasions. Well, I have to admit that I stole that from Gabby now, but now I do it not even when I can picture myself. I don't actually need to do it. There's a couple of things on that anchor that I do. I usually go in the men's room and hope there's no one in there and look myself in the face in the mirror, and also do a bit of that. Yep. And then I walk out all really calm to meet everybody, shake hands with them when we used to be able to shake hands, and then hope no one was in there thinking we got a raving lunatic about to talk to us. But yeah, so that's that. I'm going to unmute everybody now and take questions. But I want to thank you, Gabby, for that 20-minute run round of probably a 1 hour, a 1 day or a 2 day part of a NLP master practitioner.
What I would like to say is those books, and there are many, many books on NLP, are fantastic. However, NLP is a very practical use. So the best way to learn is always to go to and physically experience what NLP is all about. Because we've talked about the theory, but in an NLP course, you would actually be creating your own anchors to enable you to be more of the person you want to be more of the time.
And of course, in sports psychology, and I did talk about 10 years ago for Saracens Rugby Club before they did all the good things and then the bad things they did. And the sports psychologist, they were using a sports psychologist. And of course, his job is to look at the negative anchors, look at the positive anchors, see what the state of mind these young guys are that are playing rugby. And then he was advising the manager who to pick. I was a bit surprised about that, but now I know that most big soccer teams, golfers, tennis, where there's big money, they have not just one psychologist, different types of psychologists for different things. And someone like Tiger Woods had sacked his psychologist many times, and his coaches got back to someone else, etc. Gabby, thanks very much. I'm going to stop the recording at this stage, but I'm going to stay, guys, on the line as long as you like with questions, which is what we always do. So thanks very much again, Gabrielle Gache.